The document is genuinely remarkable to read. I mean, what elevates this beyond a standard neighborhood newsletter is how the treasurer bridges this massive gap.
Between, like, global weather and local stuff.
Exactly, between planetary scale meteorology and driveway level logistics. They're taking these massive global climate shifts and translating them into the most granular, localized action plan imaginable.
It's amazing. It functions as a literal masterclass in understanding climate threats. So our mission today is to use this incredibly detailed, hyper-local desert HOA report as a lens.
A lens to understand the concept of asymmetric risk.
Right. Yes, exactly. We are going to break down how to evaluate the hidden vulnerabilities of our own built environments. Because, even if you don't live in the California desert, the way this community dissects their infrastructure stress,
And their insurance gaps.
yeah, and their emergency timelines, it's a universal blueprint. You can literally take this framework and apply it to whatever specific weather threats are looming in your own zip code.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we need to start with the actual meteorological science that's driving the treasurer's urgency here.
Right, like what exactly is the forecast for the Coachella Valley?
Yeah. The report centers on a watch issued by NOAA in April 2026.
And the data there is pretty striking.
It really is. It shows a 62% probability of an El Niño emerging by the summer of 2026, which then climbs to, I think, an 82% chance of persisting through the winter.
Yep, 82%. But the statistic that clearly kept this treasurer awake at night is the 33% chance of a strong event,
Right.
which is what meteorologists often categorize as a Super El Niño.
Yeah, and to really grasp the gravity of that, we have to talk about the mechanics of ENSO, right? The El Niño Southern Oscillation.
Right, so under normal conditions, you have these powerful trade winds blowing across the Pacific Ocean from east to west, and they constantly push warm surface water toward Asia.
Right, so the warm water piles up over there.
Exactly. But during an El Niño event, those global trade winds weaken, and in severe cases, they actually reverse direction.
And that reversal creates a massive oceanic traffic jam. Like an enormous pool of abnormally warm water begins to accumulate in the central and eastern tropical Pacific.
And this isn't just a slight temperature bump, right?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
The sheer mass and thermal energy of that displaced ocean water fundamentally alters the atmospheric circulation above it. It actually pulls the polar jet stream southward, draping it right over the southern United States.
Which is huge, because for a place like Southern California, that shifted jet stream acts like a high-speed atmospheric conveyor belt.
Oh, yeah.
It takes these dense, moisture-laden storm systems.
The atmospheric rivers.
Exactly. Atmospheric rivers, and it funnels them directly into the desert Southwest.
And the localized effect of that is just staggering. The report notes that during these specific atmospheric setups, the Coachella Valley can get slammed with 150 to 250% of its normal winter rainfall.
Which, I mean, sounds dramatic, but we all know the desert is dry.
Right. They usually get less than 3 inches of rain annually. So doubling or tripling 3 inches still leaves you under 10 inches for the whole year.
Yeah, which doesn't sound like a disaster until you factor in the geology.
Exactly. Because desert soil isn't like a lush, absorbent forest floor. It's highly hydrophobic.
Right.
If you've ever tried to water a bone-dry potted plant, you know the feeling. It's like trying to pour a 5-gallon bucket of water onto a sheet of sloping glass.
That's a great way to put it.
The surface tension of the baked earth just rejects the water. It doesn't soak in at all. It just sheets off immediately, picking up speed and debris.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you really have to look at the massive topography surrounding the Coachella Valley.
The mountains.
Right. You have the Santa Rosa and the San Jacinto Mountains towering right over the desert floor. And when those atmospheric rivers hit that elevation, a process called orographic lift forces the storm systems up into the colder atmosphere.
It's essentially squeezing the moisture out of them like a giant sponge.
Exactly like a sponge. These mountains act as giant, sheer vertical rain catchers. And because of that hydrophobic soil you mentioned,
The glass.
yeah, the glass, all the water that dumps onto the peaks instantly turns into violent runoff, just rocketing down the steep canyons and emptying directly into the valley floor with almost zero warning time.
Which naturally leads to the question of historic precedent. Like, is this HOA treasurer just letting their imagination run wild?
You'd think so, but no.
Right. To prove the threat isn't just theoretical, the report includes a timeline of regional desert storms, and it literally reads like a disaster movie script.
It really does.
Yeah.
The historical record thoroughly validates the concern. The report points to the 1939 El Niño, where tropical moisture pushed so far inland that the nearby desert cities of Indio, Coachella and Mecca, were put completely underwater.
Completely underwater. We are talking about boats navigating main streets in a dry, arid climate.
Yeah, in the desert.
Then you move forward to 1976 with the remnants of Hurricane Kathleen. That system dumped an astonishing 14.76 inches of rain on Mount San Gorgonio.
Oh.
Yeah. And when you have nearly 15 inches of water dropping at an elevation of 10,000 feet, gravity turns that runoff into a weapon.
Oh, absolutely.
That single event flooded the entire valley below, killed 6 people, and caused over $120 million in damage statewide. And that is in 1970s dollars.
Right. And the pattern continues reliably. The massive 1997 to 1998 El Niño caused $850 million in damage across California.
Oh, yeah.
And this specific area of La Quinta experienced severe road isolation.
Wow.
Then, much more recently, Tropical Storm Hillary in August 2023 tested modern infrastructure by dumping a year's worth of rain.
Which is over 3 inches.
Right, over 3 inches
Yeah.
on Palm Springs in a compressed 36-hour window.
Now, that recent test is actually where I want to push back on the danger level for this specific neighborhood.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because the report specifically details the regional infrastructure, highlighting the Whitewater River and Stormwater Channel at a location called Point Happy.
Right, which sits right adjacent to the Watercolors community.
Exactly. And the engineering specs say this 50-mile concrete storm channel is designed to handle 80,000 cubic feet of water per second.
That's a massive amount of water.
It is. That capacity is supposed to be greater than a 100-year flood event. So, if they have this monumental piece of civil engineering literally in their backyard, shouldn't that be the end of the story? Like, why the panic if the big drain is built to handle it?
It's a fair question, but the assumption that massive visible infrastructure provides absolute safety is a psychological blind spot we call the infrastructure illusion.
The infrastructure illusion. Okay.
Right. The Coachella Valley Water District is actually remarkably transparent about this. The primary 50-mile channel is designed to handle the catastrophic valley-wide flow, sure, but the water still has to get to that channel.
Oh, right.
And to accomplish that, the local streets, the cul-de-sacs, and the neighborhood intersections are literally engineered to act as secondary flood channels.
Wait, really?
Yes. The low-lying residential areas are intentionally designed as temporary retention basins to hold back water so the main channel doesn't breach.
So the streets flooding isn't like a glitch in the matrix. It is the intended design of the city planners.
Precisely. The asphalt is part of the drainage system.
Wow.
And this is where the deceptive physics of water depth become incredibly dangerous. A resident looks out their window, sees a flooded avenue, and thinks, hey, I have a heavy SUV, I can power through that.
People do that all the time.
They do, but water is incredibly dense, weighing over 62 pounds per cubic foot. It only takes 6 inches of fast-moving water to hit the tires and push a vehicle laterally off the road.
Just 6 inches.
Just 6 inches. And when water reaches just 2 feet, the buoyancy of the vehicle's air-filled cabin actually overcomes the weight of the car, and the current will carry it away entirely.
That is terrifying.
It is. The water doesn't have to look like a raging river to be lethal, which is why emergency management constantly repeats the phrase, turn around, don't drown.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We've established the macro history of these storms and the regional infrastructure design, right?
Right.
But the treasurer takes this data and applies it directly to the 149 individual homes in their specific tract.
And the transition from massive global weather patterns to the micro vulnerabilities of a stucco house is fascinating.
It really is. So these homes were built in 2006, and they were designed with flat or very low slope roofs hidden behind parapet walls, which is, the quintessential aesthetic for modern desert architecture.
Yeah, that classic look.
But functionally, that design creates a shallow bowl on top of the house where water can just pool. Furthermore, the report notes that because these structures are 20 years old, the roof sealants, the flashings around the vents, and the rubberized membranes have endured 2 decades of intense, degrading ultraviolet desert sun.
It perfectly illustrates the paradox of building for a single extreme.
How do you mean?
Well, the developers constructed the ideal fortress to deflect blazing heat and constant sunshine, right? But the design elements that make it great for the heat.
Like the flat roofs.
Exactly, like flat roofs to minimize sun exposure angles. Those same elements leave the gates wide open for extreme precipitation.
Oh, wow. It's as if they built a perfect fortress to defend against the sun, but accidentally left the gates wide open for the rain.
That's exactly it. And combine that with the community landscaping, which heavily favors drought-tolerant shrubs and tall palm trees.
Right, desert plants.
Yeah. But palm trees have surprisingly shallow, localized root systems. When you take that hydrophobic soil, finely saturate it until it turns to thick mud, and add the high winds that accompany atmospheric rivers.
Oh, no.
Yeah, those 40-foot trees will lose their anchoring. They easily topple, often directly onto those flat roofs, cracking the already compromised sealants.
We also need to look at the physical layout of the neighborhood on a map, because this is a gated community with only a single point of entry and exit located off a thoroughfare called Avenue 48.
Which is a huge risk.
Yeah, if the local streets are designed to act as flood channels, what actually happens to this neighborhood if Avenue 48 takes on 2 feet of fast-moving water?
Well, that single point of failure creates the very real threat of physical isolation. No vehicles can enter and no vehicles can leave.
Which is bad for anyone, but here.
Right. This is where the demographic profile of Watercolors at La Quinta becomes the most critical variable in the entire report. As we mentioned, this is a 55-plus active adult community. When you are managing emergency preparedness, demographics dictate your risk tolerance just as much as your physical infrastructure does.
Because an isolated neighborhood of 30-year-olds faces very different challenges than an isolated neighborhood of retirees.
Exactly. A senior population inherently possesses a higher physical vulnerability during rapid evacuations. And more critically, there is a statistically higher likelihood of residents relying on medical equipment.
Like CPAP machines or...
CPAP machines,
What?
oxygen concentrators, refrigerated medications, you name it, things that require continuous, uninterrupted power.
Right.
If the community is cut off by floodwaters for 3 days and the local power grid fails, preparedness goes far beyond just handing out sandbags. It becomes a deeply human logistical challenge.
Wow.
Like,
Yeah.
who knows the access codes to manually override the electronic exit gates if the motors lose power? Which neighbors require physical assistance to evacuate? Who needs a wellness check on day 2 of a blackout?
It really grounds the meteorological data in a very sobering reality. Identifying these intersecting vulnerabilities, the old roofs, the shallow trees, the single exit, the vulnerable demographics, it's all meaningless without a tactical plan to mitigate them.
Very true.
And the treasurer lays out a highly structured timeline and a specific budget, providing a real-world look at what proactive governance actually looks like.
Yeah, the timeline is great. It's broken into strategic phases based on the NOAA data.
Right. April to May is designated as the prep window. June to August is the emergence phase, where they monitor the Pacific warming. September to November represents the monsoon tail, where systems traditionally strengthen.
And then December 2026 through March 2027 is boxed out as the peak threat window for atmospheric rivers to make landfall.
Right. And tying financial resources to that timeline is, I think, the most actionable part of the document. The treasurer proposes a relatively modest upfront budget of $15,300 to $15,700 for immediate proactive preparation.
Which isn't a ton for an HOA that size.
No, not at all. That capital is allocated for hydrojetting the communal storm drains to ensure they are free of debris, aggressively pruning the fronds on those vulnerable palm trees to reduce wind resistance, and purchasing 200 sandbags to stage at low-elevation homes.
Right, and they sharply contrast that minimal preventative cost with a stern recommendation to ensure the HOA maintains $25,000 to $50,000 in highly liquid cash reserves.
Because if they get hit, post-storm damage mitigation, like pumping out flooded garages, removing fallen trees, and repairing asphalt, that typically runs anywhere from $20,000 to over $100,000 for a community of this size.
It adds up so fast.
It does. But the treasurer doesn't just put the burden on the HOA board, right? They assign very specific duties to the residents themselves.
Yes. Homeowners are told to inspect their individual garage floor drains, build out a 72-hour emergency kit with water and medical supplies, and they're given a highly practical directive.
Which I loved.
Yeah. Keep your vehicle's fuel tank above the halfway mark at all times during the winter.
Yeah.
Because if the grid goes down, the electric pumps at the local gas stations go offline with it.
And you cannot refuel to evacuate.
Exactly.
But the most crucial warning for the residents involves a massive hidden vulnerability in the financial system, the insurance trap.
Oh, this is a big one.
The treasurer explicitly reminds the community that standard individual homeowner policies, as well as the HOA's master insurance policy, universally exclude flood damage.
Right.
Which feels completely counterintuitive to most people, you know? You buy homeowners insurance specifically for catastrophic weather events. Why are floods universally carved out of standard policies?
It comes down to the mechanics of risk pooling. Insurance works when a risk is randomized. If a house catches fire, it's terrible for that homeowner, but the 99 other houses in the insurance pool are fine, so their premiums cover the loss.
That makes sense.
But flooding doesn't work like that. Flooding is a correlated risk. When water breaches a channel, it doesn't destroy one house. It destroys every single house in the zip code simultaneously.
Ah,
Private insurance companies realized decades ago that a major flood could bankrupt them overnight, so they just stopped covering it entirely. If you want flood coverage in the United States, you generally have to purchase a separate policy backed by the government through the National Flood Insurance Program, or the NFIP.
and the report points out the most critical detail about the MFIP. They enforce a strict 30-day waiting period from the moment you purchase the policy until the coverage actually takes effect.
Right, and that waiting period exists to prevent adverse selection. They can't allow homeowners to watch the local weather forecast, see an atmospheric river forming off the coast, and, buy a policy 3 days before the water hits their living room.
Obviously.
You have to buy the coverage when the skies are clear.
So what does this all mean? Put yourself in the shoes of a resident attending this HOA meeting. You might look at the treasurer and ask, is it really worth spending $15,000 of our communal funds in May to clean drains for a storm that merely might hit in December?
Because climate forecasting deals in probabilities, not guarantees.
Exactly. Especially with a 6 to 9 month lead time.
What's fascinating here is how the treasurer anticipates that exact pushback and dismantles it using the framework of asymmetric risk.
Right.
Asymmetric risk occurs when the consequences of being wrong in one direction are exponentially more severe than the consequences of being wrong in the opposite direction.
So looking at the two scenarios.
Exactly. In scenario one, the HOA spends the $15,000 on drain cleaning and tree pruning, but the El Niño weekends and the winter is mild. What is the downside?
Well, the community essentially lost nothing. They just performed some slightly premature, deferred maintenance that needed to happen eventually anyway.
Exactly. But look at scenario two. They decide to save the $15,000. They do no prep. Then, the 33% probability hits, and a strong atmospheric river stalls right over the Coachella Valley. The consequence of underpreparing is catastrophic.
Yeah, the downside is hundreds of thousands of dollars in compounding infrastructure damage from clogged drains, structural damage from fallen trees, and a severe life-threatening situation for vulnerable residents trapped behind flooded gates.
The risk profile is completely lopsided. As the treasurer argues, prudent governance requires acting on the imbalance. You do not gamble with an asymmetric risk of this magnitude.
That is an incredibly powerful mental model for decision-making. It really brings into focus the tremendous value of dissecting the single localized HOA document. We started this deep dive talking about the annoyance of letters complaining about trash cans and unpainted fences.
Right.
But what this treasurer built is a profound, scalable framework. It isn't just about preserving 149 homes in La Quinta, California. It serves as a masterclass for how any of us should evaluate the intersection of global climate forecasts, our regional infrastructure design, and the specific physical vulnerabilities of the structures we live in.
It forces you to look past the superficial aesthetics of your neighborhood and really question the engineering beneath it.
Absolutely. So I want to challenge you, the listener, to consider your own blind spots after hearing this. When was the last time you read the fine print on what your homeowner's insurance actually covers?
Such a good point.
Do you know if your local streets, your cul-de-sac, or your driveway were quietly engineered by city planners to act as secondary flood channels when the main systems overflow?
This raises an important question, particularly when we consider the insurance trap the treasurer highlighted.
Oh, definitely.
We know there is a 30-day waiting period for federal flood insurance because private companies refuse to touch the risk.
Yeah.
But as these massive weather anomalies,
whether they are atmospheric rivers in the desert, intensified hurricanes on the coast, or deep freezes in the south.
right, as they become more frequent and more severe, what happens to the financial stability of these communities? If the built environment of 20 or 50 years ago fundamentally no longer matches the extreme climate reality of today, how long before the insurance industry decides to simply walk away entirely,
Wow.
leaving millions of homeowners to bear 100% of the risk for the roofs over their heads?
That is a deeply unsettling yet vital thought to carry with you as you survey your own neighborhood. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, go check those insurance policies, and most importantly, stay prepared.